Welcome to AI Goes to College, the podcast that helps higher education professionals navigate the changes brought on by generative AI. I'm your host, Dr. Craig Van Slyke. The podcast is a companion to the AI Goes to College newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter at aigoestocollege.com/newsletter. Welcome to episode number 6 of AI Goes to College. In this episode, I talk about some things of questionable value, like a new anti-AI detection tool, a paper on whether or not AI hurts critical thinking and academic performance, and how not to talk about AI in education. But there are also some good things, especially around Claude 3 and Claude 3 Haiku, and how you can use Google Docs with Gemini, which is pretty helpful on occasion. And then my favorite part of this episode is a new tool called the Curricula. I think it gives us an idea of what AI can be. All right, here's my rant of the week. Recently, I learned about a new anti-AI detection tool through a newsletter that I subscribe to, and I subscribe to a lot of AI-focused newsletters, so you don't have to. I'm not going to publicize the tool because it's terrible and it's just a bad idea overall. If you want to know, email me, craig@aigoestocollege.com, and I'll tell you. For now, I'll just call it Cheat. The idea here is that this is supposed to be a paraphraser. So you put something in, and Cheat will take what you put in and supposedly paraphrase it so it doesn't sound like AI. So I'm going to give you an example here. I've been working on an episode of my other podcast, Live Well and Flourish, which is available at livewellandflourish.com. The episode is about finding hope in troubled times. So I just thought I'd put that into ChatGPT and see what ChatGPT wrote. And here's what ChatGPT came up with. In the midst of an era marked by wars, economic upheaval, and a contentious political climate, the quest for hope becomes not just a personal endeavor, but a collective necessity. The proposed podcast episode, Hope in Strange Times, is a testament to this quest, offering a beacon of light through the synthesis of classic philosophy and modern psychology. This essay delves into the core themes of the episode: finding the good, taking control, and finding a purpose, weaving together a narrative that not only acknowledges the darkness of our times, but also illuminates pathways towards hope. And then it goes on, writes a little bit more. Finding the good is the subhead. In challenging times, the ability to find the good, a concept deeply rooted in both Stoic philosophy and positive psychology, becomes a crucial resilient strategy. And ChatGPT went on, but that little bit that I read is the limit of what the free version of Cheat will allow me to put in. So I took all of that text, copied it, pasted it into Cheat, asked Cheat to do its thing, and here's what it came up with. During times of war, economic depression, and turbulent political unrest, when the future seems bleak, the need to look for hope transcends an individual's interest and becomes a public obligation. Hope in Strange Times, the proposed podcast episode, is an attestation, what a word, to this state of being that allows a ray of light to seep into distressed souls by combining old philosophy with contemporary psychology. This essay explores the central tenets of the episode: finding the good, taking control, and finding a purpose. Those are all capitalized, by the way, which is kind of funny. Connecting stories and thread of hope in the otherwise dark hour of humanity. Oh, good night. That's just terrible. Attestation, the otherwise dark hour of humanity, ray of light to seep into distressed souls. I mean, it's just terrible. Clearly wasn't written by any human student that I've ever known. The revision could serve a little bit of a purpose. It's a great example of terrible writing. So I asked Gemini to put, I'm not going to go into all the details, but I did it again using Gemini, and the result was just as bad coming out of Cheat. So I'm not so worried about this tool. Its output is laughable. I don't think it'll last long in the marketplace. And it's pretty quickly identifiable as something other than student writing. So I don't think we have much to worry about. But here's a larger point. If universities take the approach of banning AI use, or if they don't help students understand appropriate AI use, we're going to have an arms race between AI detectors, which don't work, and AI maskers, such as Cheat, which don't seem to work either. This situation would result in losers all around, I guess, except for developers. That's why I am a big advocate of embracing AI use and helping our students embrace AI, but helping them understand how to use AI ethically and effectively. So I think this is going to be a challenge for some time to come. All right, on to the next thing. There was an article in the International Journal of Education Technology and Higher Education, interesting title, that received a lot of attention online. The article is titled, "Is it harmful or helpful? Examining the causes and consequences of generative AI use among university students." The study is kind of interesting. The authors surveyed about 500 students regarding their ChatGPT use, academic overload, time pressure, sensitivity to rewards, sensitivity to quality, procrastination, memory loss or perceived memory loss, and perceived academic performance. The authors thought that the first four affected ChatGPT use, which in turn affected the last three. I'm going to focus on kind of the outcomes. The authors found that ChatGPT use had a negative effect on academic performance and positive effects on procrastination and memory loss. So in other words, it hurt academic performance, made students procrastinate more, and led to more memory loss, except that's not really what it found. In other words, their findings seem to establish that ChatGPT use is bad. And that's kind of what got picked up out there in the public. But not so fast. The findings don't really say that. When you dig into the article, you really can't draw the same conclusions. Now, the article isn't bad. The authors check a lot of the normal methodological rigor boxes, and they collected data in 3 waves, which is a good approach. There are some serious problems when it comes to drawing the conclusion that ChatGPT use is harmful. First of all, they didn't measure changes in procrastination, memory loss, or academic performance. They measured students' perceptions of these at a single point in time, so we really don't know if anything changed. This is a subtle but really critical point. Their findings can establish that there may be correlations between ChatGPT use, or at least their measure of ChatGPT use, and student perceptions of procrastination, memory loss, and academic performance. But that doesn't mean ChatGPT caused these things. Those of you who are researchers know that causality is really hard to establish, and the authors really haven't done that here. In fact, I'm not so sure about the direction of causality. For example, I can see procrastination leading to generative AI use. We can make the same argument about memory loss and academic performance. Now, they did measure ChatGPT use first and then those outcome variables. So I want to be fair to the authors. But there wasn't enough there. They only waited 2 weeks between collecting data on ChatGPT use and the outcome variables. I don't think that's long enough for ChatGPT use to have any meaningful effects. Maybe, but I don't think so. So I don't know. The authors, the only real criticism I have for the authors is that they pushed their conclusions a little bit too far, though they did use some equivocal language to hedge a bit. So I'll put a link to the article in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself. I was not sorry to see this article. I think we need to have good research on the consequences and the causes of generative AI use among students. But, it's always a danger that the popular press and online commenters are going to pick up research without really understanding it or its limitations. So anyway, check out the article. It's worth reading. There was another article, this one out of the London School of Economics, that caught my interest. It's titled, "How Not to Talk About AI in Education." It was written by digital education consultant Helen Beetham. The article's well written and purposely provocative. It makes some good points. For example, the author notes that AI isn't a single thing or a single use case, and I absolutely agree. She claims that it's best understood as a socio-technical project, and I totally agree. We could say that about most technologies. Where I start to kind of part with the author is when she writes that we shouldn't talk about AI as a collaborator. I think that's exactly how we should be thinking about generative AI. In fact, I'm becoming more and more convinced that the right way to talk and think about generative AI is in terms of co-production, humans and AI tools working together to produce something. AI on autopilot may be good for some uses, but I think co-production is the right way to think about AI for many educational uses. I'll write more about kind of automated AI or I'll talk more about that in a later episode, but the way that we're using AI, generative AI now, I really think co-production is the phrase that I want to use. And I think it's the best way to talk about AI. So the author was really talking about collaboration in a different way. And I'll let you read the article. There'll be a link in the show notes, of course. But I think if we just dismiss the idea of collaborating with AI, we're really going to miss the boat. There's also a section called AI as the Future of Work, which seems to imply that we should not be talking about AI as the future of work. Again, I don't think the author is right here. AI is already affecting work in many industries. We just had an advisory board meeting with my department, and the industry folks were all talking about how they use AI. So I didn't quite get this section of the article. The title of this section is what threw me off. I had this negative reaction, but when I read the section, I largely agreed with the author. One of her main points is that there are some workers who will gain from AI and others will lose, and I totally agree with that. Overall, I thought the article was worth reading. She makes some good points, and it's probably a good idea to temper some of the hype around AI. I think she's wrong in some cases, but she raises some other points that are really worth thinking about. I'd love to know what you think about the article. You can email me at Craig, that's CRAIG, at aigoestocollege.com. Another thing in the news was that Claude 3 seems to, at least in the minds of a lot of developers, have better performance than GPT-4. That's a huge deal. Hugging Face, who is kind of an aggregator of AI models, has a crowdsourced chatbot arena leaderboard. The leaderboard has over 500,000 human performance votes that rank the various models. And in the latest rankings, or at least latest rankings at the time that this episode will come out, the spread between Claude 3 Opus and a couple of versions of GPT-4 was pretty narrow, but Claude came out on top. Now, the differences were so narrow that I think they're within a margin of error. So I would be more inclined to call it a tie. But Claude 3 Opus does come out on top. By the way, Google's Gemini Pro also came out pretty well, but was a little bit behind Claude 3 Opus and GPT-4. Kind of hidden in all of these results was what may have been the most remarkable result to me, and that's that the smallest, fastest version of Claude 3, Haiku, is ranked 7th, and it blew GPT 3.5 out of the water. That's pretty amazing. I'll talk more about Claude 3 Haiku in a few minutes. All right, deep breath, and then we'll move on to the next topic, which is using Google Docs with Gemini. I think this is one of the big future uses of generative AI, to use it alongside our daily driver tools like email and document creation tools, Word, Google Docs, Excel, whatever it is that you use. I know Microsoft Copilot works with a lot of the Office suite products. Gemini is working with some of the Google Docs or Google suite of Office tools. So it's an area to keep an eye on. By the way, I tried Copilot, and it didn't work all that well for me. Although after our advisory board meeting, I think I'm going to pay the $20 a month again for my personal subscription of Office 365, which is now Microsoft 365, by the way, to see if I can get it to work a little bit better for me. Google's Gemini offers some really interesting possibilities. You can use it with Google Docs in a couple of ways. One way is from within the document. I'll try to describe this. There's a little star icon when you go into a Google Doc, and if you click on that little star icon, a Gemini panel will pop up. All right, currently, Gemini will automatically summarize the document when you do that, which could be useful in some situations. And I put an example from something I wrote in the newsletter, which is available at aigoestocollege.com/newsletter. Of course, I can't really give you the screenshots here, but it was a decent summary. So then I went on and used the chat interface to ask Gemini for a bullet point overview, which turned out reasonably well. And then I asked it to create a presentation from the document. Now, right now, Gemini can't create the actual slide deck, but it did create a pretty decent structure for the presentation. It was a little bit more detailed than I would have made it, but, it was fine. I really hope that one day, before too long, Gemini will actually be able to create the entire deck, but that day is not today. So, I asked Gemini to come up with some questions that were likely to be raised by the audience during this presentation of this paper. The response was a little bit generic, but not unreasonable. So that might be an interesting use case for you if you have to give a lot of presentations of stuff that you wrote. There's a technical term for you. That all seemed to work pretty well. But you can also come at this from a different angle. You can start with Gemini. So in the example I just used, I started with Google Docs, used Gemini within Google Docs. But you can also go into Gemini and get it to access your Google Docs. You do that by using an @ symbol, so @ Google Docs. When you go into Gemini, I know that's a little bit odd to say, but when you go into your Gemini chat, if you just start off with the @ symbol, it'll bring up a list of integrations. It'll just pop up a list. Right now, there are several of them. It'll integrate with Maps. It'll integrate with Docs, kind of with Google Drive, Google Flights, Google Hotels, YouTube, which is kind of handy. And I'm not going to keep going with this too far because it's really not going to make a lot of sense if you can't see the screenshots. But if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to go to aigoestocollege.com/newsletter and check out issue number 6 of the newsletter. All the screenshots will be in there. So what I want to say kind of in closing of this little segment is that reiterate that the future, or at least one aspect of the future of generative AI, is to use it in concert with other tools like Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Excel, etc. So I would encourage you to play around with this. Especially the YouTube integration is really interesting. I've done some early testing on this. It's really good at summarizing videos. I'll try to do a write-up on that later. So anyway, check it out. If you just go into Gemini, start off with @, it'll show you the current integrations, or you can go into Google Doc, click on the little star icon that indicates AI, and you can do some pretty interesting stuff with it. All right, on to the next segment. I mentioned Claude Haiku earlier. This is a really, really interesting model. So the idea behind Claude Haiku is that it's supposed to be their fast and light member of the Claude 3 family. When I wrote my initial article about the new Claude models, Haiku had not been released publicly, but it has been now, and it is impressive. My initial test of Haiku, and I just love that word, is very promising. It was fast, and the output was really good. So I decided I'd do a side-by-side comparison of the 3 Claude models, Opus, Sonnet, and Haiku. And I use the same prompt in all three. I teach a junior level information systems class that's part of the business school core. Act as an instructional expert who is also very adept at generative AI. Please give me 10 ways I can adapt my assignments to 1, make it harder for students to use generative AI inappropriately, and 2, leverage generative AI to enhance student learning. All right, the result from OPAS was really good, and you'll have to go to the newsletter to see it. I'm not going to read it all to you, but it gave me some very interesting responses, although it went off the rails a little bit, kind of at the end of its list. Sonnet was more of a mess. That's kind of the mid-range member of the Claude family. A few of the suggestions decent, but a lot of the suggestions were really not about how to modify assignments. So I was not impressed by what Sonnet came up with. Then I ran the same prompt through Haiku. It gave me some really solid results. So I wasn't on board with all of them, but let me read these to you just really quickly. I'm not going to read all the details. Require students to document their learning process. All right, good idea. Include reflective components. Good idea. Incorporate in-class activities that build on assignments. All right, I like that. Use AI detectors, which I did not like. Design assignments that require students to apply concepts to unique situations. Good idea. Have students annotate assignments with their own thoughts. That's a really good way to think about this. That puts a personal layer on an assignment. So kind of you let the students use AI, but then they've got a comment on it. My colleague, Tom Stafford, used this recently with some pretty good success. Used that same method recently, rather. Encourage students to use AI tools for brainstorming, outlining, and editing, but require them to substantially refine the AI-generated comment and credit the use of AI. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm not sure how to operationalize that exactly. Provide AI-generated examples and have students critique them. I've done this, and that works pretty well. Use AI to create interactive simulations or case studies. Yeah, not exactly on point. And then leverage AI-powered discussion platforms. That's also not on point. But out of the three, I really liked Haiku's response the best. So you should check it out. If you have access to Claude, give Haiku a try. It really is fast. It was pretty good. So the bottom line here is don't just assume that the most powerful models, it will give you the best results. Sometimes that extra power makes them go a little bit further than you want them to go. By the way, I want to put in another plug for Poe.com. It's a great resource for trying out various models. I wrote about that in the very first issue of AI Goes to College, which you can access through aigoestocollege.com/newsletter. All right. Now here's, to me, what's the most exciting part. I kind of saved the best for last. And it's a new tool called the Curricula. There's a link in the show notes. It's www, I guess you don't have to type that part in, the Curricula, that's TheCurricula.com. What the Curricula does is it creates an AI-generated learning guide for virtually any topic. Now, this is a kind of a personal project for a developer who's done a bunch of these kinds of things, not necessarily in the same domain, but it's an interesting project. If you go to the website, it's pretty bare bones, but it's got everything you need. You just put in a topic. There's a little text entry area that says, what do you want to learn today? Type it in, and it does its thing. And then it has a list of, I don't know, a dozen or so suggested topics like cybersecurity, data analysis, statistics, ethics and moral philosophy, and there are some others. So you put in what you want to learn about or click on one of the suggested topics, and you get a curriculum. You get a learning guide. And I can't really do justice to the learning guide here in an audio format. But again, I know you're tired of me saying this, but you can go to the newsletter and the screenshots will help you see what's going on, or you can just go to the Curricula.com and check it out for yourself. So the guide that it puts out looks pretty reasonable, but then it goes further. It gives you a bunch of concepts that tie into the learning guide. When you click on one of those concepts, there's a little arrow next to the concept. You get a list of resources. There's a short description of the concept, and then you get a list of books, articles, videos, and courses that go along with that particular concept. Everything looked pretty good to me, so I wanted to try it with something I know more about. So I asked the Curricula to create a learning guide for decision making. And again, go to the newsletter, or I'll put a link in the show notes to the to the learning guide that it created, so you can check it out. It was pretty good. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't really expect perfect. But it was pretty amazing that in a matter of seconds, really seconds, you can create a really good start on a curriculum. The guide was maybe a little bit off on some things like decision-making tools. So what I did is I went back in and asked for a learning guide for decision-making tools, and then it did a really nice job, including adding a bunch of standard decision-making methods like decision matrix, decision trees, and some others. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes to show you that learning guide. I think this has serious potential. So if I had to create a new course and had this tool available, I think I would go in and start off with maybe an overall learning guide, or maybe I would do a little bit of thinking and kind of create the overall structure of the course. Then I would go in and create these learning guides for each major topic. You've still got to put the work in to refine all of that, but any of you who have created a course know what a colossal amount of work it is. So if this cuts the work in half, that's a pretty big win. So anyway, I suggest that you check it out. Again, it's thecurricula.com, and let me know what you think. Craig at aigoestocollege.com. I would really like to see you all check it out, because I want to see the developer, Mike Dyer, in his company, Ching Dog U Labs. Interesting name, kind of fun. I'm hoping maybe if he gets enough interest in it, he'll try to make it a commercial product. So even if he doesn't, this is a really good example of what's possible with generative AI. So I really, really encourage you to check it out, just so you can see what the possibilities are. All right, I need more coffee, and I need to start mowing my pastures because it's summertime now. So that's it for today. I will talk to you next time. Thank you. Thanks for listening to AI Goes to College. If you found this episode useful, you'll love the AI Goes to College newsletter. Each edition brings you useful tips, news, and insights that you can use to help you figure out what in the world is going on with generative AI and how it's affecting higher ed. Just go to aigoestocollege.com to sign up. I won't try to sell you anything, and I won't spam you or share your information with anybody else. As an incentive for subscribing, I'll send you the Getting Started with Generative AI guide. Even if you're an expert with AI, you'll find the guide useful for helping your less knowledgeable colleagues.